Get her away from me. I don't care what sob story she has. I pay first-class money, first-class people, not charity cases.
The words sliced through the cabin of American Airlines Flight 447 like a knife through silk. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. The peaceful pre-departure atmosphere of the Dallas to Washington, D.C. route evaporated in an instant. Richard Blackwood, 52, stood in the aisle between seats 2A and 2B, his face flushed red with indignation. His $4,000 Armani suit couldn't hide the ugly entitlement radiating from every pore. Behind him, his leather briefcase lay open, spilling documents marked Blackwood Energy Federal Contract Proposal $2.3 billion. The target of his rage sat calmly in seat 2B, barely acknowledging his existence. Dr. Vanessa Clarke, 48, adjusted her thin-rimmed glasses and continued reading a thick folder labeled Federal Aviation Administration Emergency Protocol Review. Her cream-colored blazer was understated but elegant, her natural hair pulled back in a professional bun. She exuded the kind of quiet confidence that comes from years of facing down much bigger challenges than an entitled businessman having a tantrum. What Richard didn't know, what none of the 47 passengers in first class knew, was that in exactly 16 minutes he would discover he was screaming at the one woman in America who could ground every commercial aircraft in the country with a single signature. Before we dive into this incredible story, I want to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below. And if you've ever been told you don't belong somewhere, this one's for you. Hit that subscribe button because what happens next will blow your mind. Richard Blackwood wasn't just any angry passenger. He was the CEO and founder of Blackwood Energy, a massive conglomerate worth $8.7 billion that controlled oil, natural gas, and renewable energy contracts across 3 continents. His personal net worth exceeded $2 billion accumulated over 30 years of ruthless business deals, and an unshakable belief that money could solve any problem, move any obstacle, and silence any opposition. Today was supposed to be the crown jewel of his career. He was flying to Washington, D.C. to finalize a federal energy contract that would cement his company's dominance for the next decade. The meeting with Department of Energy officials was scheduled for 3 p.m., just 4 hours after his planned arrival. Everything had been orchestrated perfectly, except for the woman sitting in 2B, who refused to acknowledge his superiority. Sarah Richard barked at the flight attendant, a woman in her mid-30s with 15 years of experience navigating difficult passengers. Sarah Mitchell approached cautiously, her practiced smile already showing signs of strain. "Yes, Mr. Blackwood. How can I help you today? Fix this." He gestured dismissively toward Vanessa without looking at her. "I specifically requested privacy for this flight. This is a business environment, not a community outreach program." Sarah's smile faltered slightly. "Sir Dr. Clarke has a valid first-class ticket. All passengers in this cabin have equal. Richard's voice rose another octave. "I spend $400,000 annually with this airline. My corporate account books over 200 flights a year. That's not equal, that's premium. Now find her a seat in the back where she'll be more comfortable." From seat 3. Maria Gonzalez lowered her phone slowly. At 32, Maria was a travel influencer with 2.3 million followers across Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. She'd built her brand documenting the real experiences of traveling while Latina the good and the ugly. Something about this confrontation felt familiar, uncomfortably so. "Are you recording this?" David Thompson whispered from seat 3B. At 28, the tech entrepreneur had built his venture capital firm by reading people and situations quickly. His initial instinct was to side with Richard. After all, they were both business leaders who understood the value of exclusivity. "I think I need to," Maria whispered back, her finger hovering over the record button. "This feels wrong." Vanessa finally looked up from her folder. Her dark eyes met Richard's gaze with a calmness that seemed to unnerve him. When she spoke, her voice was measured professional, with just a hint of the Alabama accent she'd worked years to minimize. "Mr. Blackwood, you're making quite a scene over something that doesn't concern you. I suggest you take your seat so we can depart on time." Richard's jaw dropped. "How do you know my name? Who are you?" "Someone who pays attention," Vanessa replied simply, returning to her reading. The response sent Richard into orbit. He'd built his empire on intimidation, on being the loudest, most demanding voice in every room. The fact that this woman could dismiss him so casually was incomprehensible. "Look at you," he said, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was a reasonable tone. "Look at this cabin. This isn't about race, it's about appropriateness. I have investors on this flight. I have a federal meeting that could change the energy landscape of America. I need an environment that reflects the seriousness of my business." "Which investors?" Vanessa asked without looking up. "The ones from Kazakhstan who are under investigation for corruption, or the Saudi princes who your company paid $14 million in bribes last year?" The color drained from Richard's face. "How could you possibly know that? Lucky guess." From the galley, Sarah watched the exchange with growing alarm. In 15 years of flying, she'd handled drunk passengers, celebrities, politicians, and millionaires. But she'd never seen someone challenge Richard Blackwood and live to tell about it. His reputation for destroying careers was legendary in business circles. "Ma'am," Sarah interjected gently, "perhaps we could find you another seat. Mr. Blackwood is one of our most valued customers, and if we could accommodate number." Vanessa's voice was quiet but absolute. "I will not be moved to accommodate anyone's prejudices. I paid for this seat, I'm qualified to sit in this seat, and I will occupy this seat until we reach Washington." Richard's face turned purple. "Prejudices. You think this is about prejudice? This is about standards. This is about maintaining an environment appropriate for serious business. And what about me suggests I'm not serious about business? Mr. Blackwood, you—" Richard gestured frantically, looking for words that wouldn't get him in legal trouble. "You don't look like someone who belongs in first class. This is for executives, for leaders, for people who've earned their place." The cabin fell silent. Even the engine noise seemed to fade as 47 passengers held their breath. Richard had just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and everyone knew it. Maria's finger pressed record. "Have you ever witnessed discrimination on a flight? Share your experience in the comments below. We want to hear from you." David Thompson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. As a venture capitalist, he'd been taught to network with anyone who had money and influence. Richard Blackwood was exactly the kind of contact that could open doors. But watching this scene unfold, David felt a growing unease about what those doors might lead to. "Mr. Blackwood," he ventured carefully, "maybe we should all just calm down and—" "Stay out of this, kid," Richard snapped. "This is between me and airline management. Sarah, I want to speak to the captain immediately. I want this woman removed from my site, or I'm calling CEO Richard Martinez personally." Vanessa's pen stopped moving across the document she'd been annotating. For the first time since the confrontation began, she looked genuinely surprised. "Please, do call him," she said slowly. "Ask for Richard Martinez personally. Tell him Vanessa Clarke says hello." The confidence in her voice sent a chill through Richard's bluster. Something wasn't adding up. This woman knew too much, spoke with too much authority, showed too little fear. But he was too deep into his tantrum to back down now. Fine Richard pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts until he found American Airlines' executive line. "We'll see how tough you are when you're talking to airport security." As he dialed, Vanessa reached into her briefcase and pulled out her own phone. The device looked standard except for the unusual number of security clearance stickers decorating the case. She typed a quick message. "Transport Security Team Flight 447 DAL to DCA. Documentation in progress. Recommend full monitoring." The response came back within seconds. Copy. All stations alerted. All tied. Ready for your signal, Chairwoman. Richard's call connected. This is Richard Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood Energy. I need to speak to Richard Martinez immediately. Yes, I know he's busy. Tell him it's about a discrimination situation on Flight 447 that could cost him a major corporate account. While Richard argued with Martinez's assistant, Sarah noticed other passengers pulling out their phones. The scene had attracted attention throughout the first-class cabin, and in the age of social media, nothing stayed private for long. "Should I try to shut this down?" she whispered to Elena Vasquez, the gate agent who had boarded to handle some last-minute documentation. Elena, 29, had been with American for 8 years. She'd seen her share of entitled passengers, but something about this situation felt different. The woman in 2B radiated an authority that Elena couldn't quite place. "Let it play out," Elena whispered back. "I have a feeling this is about to resolve itself in a way none of us expect." Captain James Rodriguez had been monitoring the situation from the cockpit through the internal communication system. At 45, with 20 years of flying experience, he'd handled every kind of passenger emergency imaginable. But the voices coming through the intercom suggested this was escalating beyond a simple seating dispute. "Sarah," his voice came through her earpiece. "I'm going to need a full report on what's happening back there. We've got air traffic control asking about a delay." Before Sarah could respond, Richard's phone conversation exploded into shouting. "What do you mean you know who she is?" "I don't care who she thinks she is. I'm Richard Blackwood. I own a fleet of 47 private jets I could buy and sell this airline." There was a pause. Then Richard's voice dropped to a confused whisper. "He hung up on me." Vanessa looked up from her folder with the slightest smile. "Richard Martinez is a good man. I've known him for 3 years. He understands the importance of treating all passengers with dignity regardless of their appearance or background." "You're lying," Richard said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "You're nobody. You're just some diversity hire trying to punch above your weight." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Maria's recording captured every syllable. David Thompson buried his face in his hands, finally understanding that he was watching someone's career commit suicide in real time. Vanessa closed her folder deliberately, placed her pen in her briefcase, and stood up. At 5 feet 6 inches, she wasn't physically imposing, but something about her presence made the entire cabin feel smaller. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that made everyone lean forward to listen. "You've just made the worst assumption of your professional life, and in about 10 minutes you're going to understand exactly why." Richard's face cycled through confusion, anger, and the first flicker of genuine concern. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," Vanessa said, settling back into her seat with perfect composure, "that your education is about to begin. Sarah, would you please ask Captain Rodriguez to join us? I believe it's time for some introductions." As Sarah hurried toward the cockpit, Richard stood frozen in the aisle, suddenly aware that 47 pairs of eyes were watching him with a mixture of fascination and horror. Maria's recording light blinked steadily. David had pulled out his own phone, no longer concerned about networking opportunities. The next few minutes would shatter Richard Blackwood's world in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. But for now, suspended in that moment between arrogance and enlightenment, he had no idea that he'd just challenged the most powerful woman in American aviation. The plane sat at the gate engines, humming with anticipation. But the real fireworks were about to begin inside. Richard Blackwood hadn't always been a monster. As Sarah watched him pace the aisle like a caged animal, she wondered how someone becomes so divorced from basic human decency that they could speak to another person the way he'd just spoken to Dr. Clarke. The answer lay in 30 years of unchecked power and the dangerous belief that success justifies any behavior. Richard had grown up in Lubbock, Texas, the son of an oil field worker who died in a pipeline explosion when Richard was 12. His mother, Maria Blackwood, cleaned houses to keep food on the table. Richard remembered the humiliation of wearing second-hand clothes, of having his electricity shut off, of watching his mother's hands crack and bleed from industrial cleaning chemicals. At 18, he'd sworn he would never be powerless again. The oil boom of the 1990s gave him his chance, working 18-hour days in the Texas heat. Richard learned that the energy business rewarded aggression, ruthlessness, and an ability to make others fear you. By 30, he owned 3 drilling operations. By 40, he'd merged those into Blackwood Energy and begun acquiring competitors through hostile takeovers. The problem with climbing out of powerlessness through domination is that you never stop needing victims to feel secure. Richard's success hadn't healed his childhood wounds, it had weaponized them. Every boardroom had to have someone he could diminish. Every negotiation required someone to lose completely. Every social situation demanded that he establish his superiority immediately and absolutely. Standing in the aisle of Flight 447, Richard felt that familiar panic rising in his chest, the same panic he'd felt as a 12-year-old watching his mother beg the electric company for more time. Someone was challenging his authority, refusing to acknowledge his superiority, and treating him like he didn't matter. It was his greatest fear made manifest being powerless again. What Richard couldn't see was that his reaction to Dr. Vanessa Clarke revealed everything about his character and nothing about hers. Dr. Vanessa Clarke had also known powerlessness, but her response had been entirely different. Born in Tuskegee, Alabama in 1975, Vanessa was the daughter of Colonel Marcus Clarke, one of the last living Tuskegee airmen. Her father had fought Hitler's Air Force in the skies over Europe, then come home to a country that wouldn't let him vote. But Marcus Clarke had never let bitterness consume his love for aviation. "Baby girl," he'd tell 7-year-old Vanessa as they watched planes overhead, "those machines don't see color. Physics doesn't care about prejudice. If you understand the science, you can master the sky." Vanessa had taken those words to heart. While other children played house, she built model airplanes. While teenagers dated, she studied aerodynamics. Her mother, Dr. Angela Clarke, a mathematics professor at Tuskegee University, ensured Vanessa's education was uncompromising. At MIT, Vanessa was one of only 3 African American students in the aerospace engineering program. The isolation was crushing. Professors questioned her preparation. Classmates assumed she was there through affirmative action. Study groups somehow formed around her without including her. But Vanessa had her father's resilience and her mother's precision. She graduated summa cum laude, earned her Ph.D. in 4 years, and immediately went to work for NASA. Her doctoral thesis on aviation safety protocols had revolutionized how the industry thought about preventing human error. The Federal Aviation Administration recruited her in 2010. By 2018, she was the youngest deputy administrator in the agency's history. When the previous chairman retired, President Biden had personally called to ask if she was ready to lead. "Dad," she'd called Marcus that night, "I think I'm about to become responsible for every airplane in America." "Baby girl," the 98-year-old veteran had replied, "Your great-grandmother was born into slavery. I fought Nazis. Your generation gets to run things. It's about time." But being chairwoman of the Federal Aviation Administration wasn't just about technical expertise. It meant overseeing an industry where discrimination complaints had increased 340% in the past 5 years. It meant investigating why passengers like her were routinely questioned, moved, or removed from flights, while white passengers like Richard faced no such scrutiny. 3 months ago, her office had received a cluster of complaints about the Dallas-Washington corridor. Successful African-American professionals, doctors, lawyers, executives, reported being challenged, humiliated, or denied services that white passengers received automatically. The complaints had a pattern. They typically involved flights with wealthy white passengers who demanded special treatment. Rather than assign investigators, Vanessa had decided to experience the route herself. She'd booked this flight under her own name with her own credit card, wearing professional but unremarkable clothing. She wanted to see if the reports were accurate. Sitting in seat 2B, listening to Richard Blackwood's tirade, she had her answer. The other passengers watching this confrontation had their own stories, their own reasons for caring about what happened next. Maria Gonzalez had built her 2.3 million follower travel blog around honest documentation of bias in the travel industry. At 32, she'd experienced everything from hotel clerks who spoke to her in broken English despite her American accent to airline agents who questioned whether her business class tickets were legitimate. "My followers trust me to show the real world of travel," she'd told her producer last month. "Not just the Instagram perfect moments, but the moments when the world shows you that it doesn't think you belong." Recording Richard's meltdown wasn't opportunism, it was journalism. David Thompson's involvement was more complicated. At 28, the venture capitalist had worked hard to build relationships with powerful executives like Richard. His firm, Thompson Ventures, specialized in energy sector investments. Richard Blackwood had been on his networking list for 2 years, but watching Richard's behavior, David felt the uncomfortable realization that success in his industry might require tolerating or even enabling this kind of treatment of others. The question was whether he was willing to sacrifice his conscience for his career. Sarah Mitchell had joined American Airlines 15 years ago because she loved travel and wanted to see the world. What she'd seen instead was how power dynamics played out at 35,000 feet. Wealthy passengers who treated crew members like servants. Business leaders who believed first-class tickets granted them ownership of the cabin. She'd filed 3 reports about passenger discrimination in the past year. Each time, management had asked her to de-escalate rather than enforce policy. The message was clear: valuable customers had different rules. Standing in the galley, watching Dr. Clarke maintain her dignity under assault, Sarah felt something crystallize in her mind. If management wouldn't stand up for passengers, maybe it was time for crew members to. Captain James Rodriguez represented the old guard of aviation pilots who remembered when flying was considered a public service, not just a profit center. At 45, with 2 decades of experience, he'd noticed the increasing hostility in cabins as airlines prioritized revenue over respect. Rodriguez had grown up in El Paso, the son of an air traffic controller who'd taught him that aviation was about safely moving people from one place to another, regardless of who they were or how much they paid. "A plane doesn't care about your bank account," his father had said. "Gravity treats everyone the same. So should we." Walking toward the passenger cabin, Rodriguez had no idea he was about to meet the most powerful person in American aviation. But he understood that how he handled the next few minutes would define his own character. Elena Vasquez had worked gate operations long enough to recognize power when she saw it. Something about the woman in 2B seemed familiar, but she couldn't place where she'd seen her before. The confidence, the way she spoke with authority about airline policies, the casual mention of CEO Richard Martinez, it all suggested someone with insider knowledge. Standing near the boarding door, Elena made a decision. She pulled out her phone and sent a quick text to her supervisor: "May need executives on standby. Situation developing on 447. The response came back immediately. What kind of situation? Elena looked at Richard Blackwood, red-faced and shouting into his phone, then at Dr. Clarke, calm and composed, despite being under attack. The kind that ends careers, she typed back. As Captain Rodriguez approached the first-class cabin, these 6 people, Vanessa, Richard, Maria, David, Sarah, and Elena, were about to create a moment that would be remembered as a turning point in civil rights and aviation history. None of them knew it yet. But in the next few minutes, the most powerful industry in America was about to collide with a truth it had been avoiding for decades: that dignity isn't negotiable, regardless of how much money you pay for your ticket. The only question was whether Richard Blackwood would learn that lesson before or after it destroyed everything he'd built. Captain Rodriguez emerged from the cockpit with the measured stride of a man accustomed to handling crises. At 6 feet 2 inches with salt and pepper hair and the kind of weathered hands that come from 20 years of flying, he commanded immediate attention. His uniform was immaculate, his expression professionally neutral, but his dark eyes took in the scene with sharp intelligence. "Good afternoon, folks. I'm Captain Rodriguez. I understand we have a seating concern." His voice carried the authority of someone who'd talked nervous passengers through turbulence-managed emergency landings and negotiated with air traffic control in 3 languages. But as he approached row 2, he could feel the tension radiating through the cabin like heat from a furnace. Richard turned to the captain like a drowning man grabbing a life preserver. "Captain, thank God. I need this passenger relocated immediately. This is a business environment, and her presence is disruptive to my federal meeting preparation." Rodriguez looked from Richard to Vanessa, noting the stark contrast between Richard's agitated state and the woman's serene composure. "Ma'am, is there a problem with your seat?" "None whatsoever," Vanessa replied without looking up from her folder. "I'm exactly where I belong." "You see," Richard's voice climbed toward hysteria, "she's being deliberately confrontational. Look, Captain." "I'm not trying to be difficult here. I'm Richard Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood Energy. I'm flying to Washington to finalize a $2.3 billion federal contract. I need a professional atmosphere, not whatever this is." Rodriguez had dealt with entitled passengers before, but something about Blackwood's demeanor set off alarm bells. The man wasn't just angry. He was desperate, like someone whose worldview was being challenged in a fundamental way. "Mr. Blackwood, all passengers in first class have paid for the same service and deserve the same respect. If you're uncomfortable with the current seating arrangement, we'd be happy to relocate you to business class." The suggestion hit Richard like a physical blow. "Relocate me. I spent $8,000 on this seat. I have Platinum Elite status. You want me to move because she's here. I want you to sit down so we can depart on time," Rodriguez said firmly. "This aircraft has 312 passengers who would like to reach Washington on schedule." "This isn't about the schedule." Richard's voice broke with frustration. "This is about standards. This is about maintaining appropriate boundaries." From row 3, Maria continued recording her phone, capturing every word. Her live stream had attracted over 8,000 viewers in the past 10 minutes, with comments flooding in from around the world. "What boundaries would those be, sir?" Rodriguez asked, his tone dangerously quiet. Richard realized he was approaching another precipice, but his anger had long since overwhelmed his judgment. "Look around this cabin, Captain. Look at the other passengers. Look at me. We're business leaders, professionals, people who've earned their place here. We share certain expectations about our environment. And what expectations are those? Comfort, compatibility. People who understand the protocol of first-class travel." Maria's viewers were exploding with outrage. Comments streamed across her screen. "Is this really happening? Someone, please tell me this is fake. How is this airline allowing this?" David Thompson found himself in an impossible position. Part of him wanted to defend Richard, not his words, but his right to feel comfortable on a flight he'd paid for. Another part of him recognized that comfort built on someone else's exclusion wasn't comfort at all. It was privilege. "Mr. Blackwood," David said carefully, "maybe we should all just stay out of this," Richard snapped. "This is between me and the airline. Captain, I'm going to make this simple for you. Either you move her, or I'm calling the Department of Transportation, the Better Business Bureau, and every business journal in America. Is this really the hill you want to die on?" Rodriguez had been flying long enough to recognize a bluff when he heard one. More importantly, he'd been alive long enough to recognize bigotry, regardless of how it was dressed up in business language. Sir, the only person being moved will be you if you continue to disrupt this flight. Ma'am. He turned to Vanessa. I apologize for this situation. You are welcome in any seat on this aircraft. Vanessa finally looked up and Rodriguez felt a jolt of recognition. He'd seen this woman before but couldn't place where. Her bearing, her confidence, the way she seemed completely unintimidated by the chaos around her. It reminded him of the senior executives he'd met during his military days. Thank you, Captain Rodriguez. Your professionalism is noted and appreciated. Something about her phrasing, formal, official, like someone accustomed to being listened to, made Rodriguez pause. Ma'am, have we met before? Not directly, but I've heard excellent things about your safety record and leadership. The conversation was becoming surreal. How could a passenger have detailed knowledge of his professional record? Rodriguez had commendations from the FAA Safety Awards, recognition for his handling of emergency situations, but that information wasn't public knowledge. Richard sensed he was losing control of the situation and decided to escalate. Fine. You want to know what this is really about? I'll tell you exactly what this is about. The cabin went dead silent. Even Maria's live stream comments paused as if the entire internet was holding its breath. I work 18 hours a day. I built my company from nothing. I provide jobs for 8,000 people and energy for millions more. When I pay first-class money, I expect a first-class experience. That means being surrounded by people who understand business, who speak the language of success, who belong in a professional environment. And you don't think I belong here? Vanessa asked quietly. I think you're in the wrong section, Richard said, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was a reasonable tone. This isn't personal. This is practical. Look, I'm sure you're a lovely person, but this cabin is for executives, for leaders, for people who've earned their place at the top. And what makes you think I haven't earned my place? Richard gestured helplessly as if the answer should be obvious. Just look around. Look at the demographic of this cabin. Look at the natural order of things. The phrase hung in the air like poison gas. Natural order. As if inequality was written into the laws of physics. As if discrimination was just another force of nature. Maria's live stream exploded with comments. Natural order began trending within minutes. Business journalists started picking up the story. American Airlines' stock price twitched downward as traders realized this was going to be a public relations nightmare. Mr. Blackwood. Captain Rodriguez said, his voice now carrying the full weight of his authority. You are one sentence away from being escorted off this aircraft by federal marshals. I suggest you choose your next words very carefully. But Richard had passed the point of no return. 30 years of unchecked power, of having every demand met and every whim catered to, had convinced him that reality itself would bend to his will. The natural order, Captain, is that successful people associate with other successful people. That's not discrimination, that's economics. That's social structure. That's the way the world works, and no amount of political correctness is going to change basic human nature. Vanessa closed her folder with a soft snap that seemed to echo through the cabin. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority that made everyone lean forward. Mr. Blackwood, you just revealed everything about your character and nothing about mine. But more importantly, you've revealed everything about your understanding of federal aviation law, which appears to be zero. What's that supposed to mean? It means, Vanessa said, reaching into her briefcase, that discrimination based on race, ethnicity, or perceived social status is not only morally reprehensible, it's a federal crime. And as of this moment, you're committing that crime in front of 47 witnesses and at least 8,000 people watching online. Richard's face went through several colors before settling on gray. You can't be serious. You can't be... I never mentioned race. I never said anything about You mentioned natural order, appropriate demographics, and social structure. You questioned my right to be here based solely on my appearance. You demanded I be moved to the back where I would be more comfortable. Those aren't business concerns, Mr. Blackwood. They're civil rights violations. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the engine noise seemed muted as 47 passengers processed what they'd just witnessed. David Thompson felt sick to his stomach. This was what networking in his industry looked like. This was the kind of person he'd been trying to build relationships with. Sarah Mitchell realized she'd just watched someone confess to federal crimes on camera while she stood by and did nothing to stop it. Elena Vasquez understood that she was about to witness either the most spectacular passenger removal in airline history or the complete capitulation of a man who'd built an empire on bullying others. Maria's phone continued recording, capturing every micro-expression on Richard's face as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. And Captain Rodriguez found himself in the unprecedented position of having to decide whether to treat this as a passenger disturbance or a federal crime in progress. But the most important person in the cabin remained perfectly calm, as if she'd been through this exact scenario before and knew exactly how it would end. Captain Rodriguez Vanessa said, her voice carrying the unmistakable tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed. I think it's time we made some introductions. Mr. Blackwood clearly doesn't understand who he's speaking to. Ma'am, perhaps we should start with my credentials. As Vanessa reached into her briefcase once more, Richard Blackwood's world was about to shift in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. But for a few more seconds, suspended between ignorance and enlightenment, he still had no idea that he'd just confessed to civil rights violations in front of the one person in America with the power to end his career with a single phone call. The moment of truth was approaching at 30,000 feet per minute. Maria's phone screen lit up with notifications as her live stream reached 15,000 viewers and climbing. Comments flooded in faster than she could read them, a digital waterfall of outrage, disbelief, and demands for justice. Traveling, Maria appeared in dozens of retweet chains within minutes. Is this really happening? Someone needs to stop this. Get this man's name. The hashtag Flight447 began trending organically without any central coordination or celebrity endorsement. From her seat in 3A, Maria provided running commentary to her audience. Guys, I wish I could tell you this was scripted, but this is real. This is happening right now on American Airlines Flight 447 from Dallas to D.C. A businessman just told a black woman she doesn't belong in first class because of natural order. The comments section exploded. Dallas T. OMG. Is that Richard Blackwood from Blackwood Energy Justice. Now someone better get his company info flight rights. This is illegal under federal aviation law. Traveling soul. That woman is so calm. I would have lost it by now. David Thompson, watching Maria's professional documentation of the incident, made a decision that would change his career trajectory. He pulled out his own phone and started a Twitter thread. I'm currently sitting 3 feet away from the most disturbing display of racism I've ever witnessed in person. A business executive is demanding that a black passenger be moved from first class. Here's what's happening. 147th. His thread would eventually reach 2.3 million impressions and be cited in congressional hearings. But the social media explosion was just beginning. Other passengers throughout the cabin started recording, creating a multi-angle documentation of discrimination that would become a textbook case study in civil rights law. Sarah Martinez, a journalist in Seat 4C, began live tweeting breaking, witnessing racist meltdown on American Air Flight 447. Passenger demands black woman be moved from first class. American Air. How do you train your staff to handle this? American Airlines social media team monitoring brand mentions in real time flagged the incident within 6 minutes. Emergency protocols activated. Stock prices began sliding. Executive assistants started receiving urgent calls from board members who had Google alerts on company mentions. By the time Richard Blackwood finished his natural order speech, Blackwood Energy was trending alongside American Airlines and Flight 447. Corporate crisis management teams at both companies were scrambling to understand how a simple passenger dispute had become an international incident in under 20 minutes. Elena Vasquez, monitoring the situation from the boarding area, received a flurry of texts from her supervisor. "What's happening on 447? Social media is exploding. CEO's office calling need full report. Now." Elena typed back. "Passenger discrimination incident. Multiple recordings. May need legal team." Captain Rodriguez, unaware of the digital firestorm building outside his aircraft, focused on the immediate problem of a passenger who seemed determined to continue digging his own grave. "Mr. Blackwood," he said with the patience of a man who'd talked people down from much higher ledges, "I'm going to give you one final opportunity to apologize to this passenger and take your seat. Otherwise, we'll be deplaning you and addressing this situation on the ground." "Apologize?" Richard's voice cracked with indignation. "For what?" "For speaking the truth. For defending the standards that made this country great." The statement triggered another avalanche of social media activity. Maria's viewers jumped to 22,000. David's Twitter thread gained 500 retweets in 60 seconds. News outlets started monitoring the hashtags, but the most significant response came from an unexpected source. Dr. Angela Clarke, Vanessa's mother and a retired mathematics professor at Tuskegee University, had been following Maria's live stream after receiving a notification from her daughter's security detail. At 74, she wasn't particularly tech-savvy, but she understood exactly what she was watching. She picked up her phone and called her old friend, Congresswoman Barbara Lee. "Barbara, you need to see what's happening on social media right now. My daughter is being harassed on a commercial flight, and it's being broadcast live to thousands of people." Congresswoman Lee, a senior member of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, immediately called her chief of staff. Within minutes, congressional staffers were monitoring the situation and preparing statements. The ripple effects spread outward like concentric circles from a stone dropped in still water. Dr. Marcus Clark Vanessa's 98-year-old father and Tuskegee Airman was watching from his assisted living facility in Alabama. His nurse, recognizing the name Dr. Vanessa Clarke from news coverage of her FAA appointment, called the local NAACP chapter. Within 30 minutes, civil rights organizations across the country were mobilizing. Press releases were drafted. Legal teams were contacted. The machinery of social justice, honed by decades of fighting discrimination, roared to life. But the most powerful response came from inside the aircraft itself. James Wilson, a passenger in seat 5A, was a federal prosecutor specializing in civil rights violations. He'd been quietly recording since Richard's first outburst, recognizing immediately that he was witnessing potential federal crimes. He sent a quick text to his colleague at the Department of Justice documenting civil rights violation in progress on commercial flight. "May need immediate investigation." The response came back within minutes. "Send everything. DOJ, Civil Rights Division, standing by." Dr. Patricia Morgan, seated in 6B, was the dean of Harvard Law School. She'd built her career fighting discrimination in higher education and recognized the legal implications of Richard's statements immediately. Her tweet would be retweeted by every major legal scholar in the country. Witnessing textbook case of 42 U.S.C., Section 1981, violation on American Air. Passenger openly advocating for racial segregation on commercial flight. This is why we study civil rights law. The academic legal community erupted. Law professors assigned the incident as real-time case studies. Legal blogs published instant analyses. Civil rights organizations prepared amicus briefs for lawsuits that hadn't even been filed yet. Meanwhile, Richard Blackwood remained oblivious to the digital earthquake he'd triggered. His attention was focused entirely on winning an argument with a woman who refused to be intimidated by his tantrums. "Look," he said, trying a different approach. "Let's be practical about this. I'm offering a reasonable solution to an uncomfortable situation. There are plenty of seats in business class. She'd probably be more comfortable there anyway with people more like her." People more like her. Captain Rodriguez repeated, his professional composure finally beginning to crack. "You know what I mean," Richard said impatiently. "People at her level, her comfort zone. This isn't about superiority, it's about compatibility." Maria's live stream peaked at 31,000 viewers as Richard sealed his fate with those words. The comment section became a blur of outrage, legal analysis, and promises that this man's career is over. But the most revealing moment came when a passenger in row 7 recognized Richard and called out, "Hey, aren't you the guy who testified to Congress about energy policy?" Richard Blackwood. Richard straightened with pride, finally back in familiar territory. "Yes, I've testified before Congress multiple times. I've advised 3 presidents on energy strategy. I've built a company worth nearly $9 billion. That's exactly my point. I think I've earned the right to travel in comfort." The admission sent shockwaves through the social media ecosystem. Here was a man who'd testified before Congress, advised presidents, and controlled billions in federal contracts, openly advocating for racial discrimination on camera. Congressional staffers frantically reviewed Blackwood Energy's federal contracts. Environmental groups pulled up his testimony transcripts. Business journalists started investigating whether his company had discriminatory hiring practices. David Thompson watched his networking target destroy himself in real time and made a decision that would define his character. He stopped recording and called his business partner. "Cancel the Blackwood Energy meeting. Remove them from our investment targets. And draft a statement condemning discrimination in business partnerships." His partner tried to argue Blackwood Energy represented potentially massive returns. But David had seen enough. Some profits weren't worth the moral cost. As Richard continued ranting, oblivious to the digital revolution building around him, Vanessa Clarke sat quietly, occasionally taking notes in her folder. She wasn't angry or upset. She was documenting. Every word, every gesture, every revelation of character was being preserved for the report that would reshape American aviation. What Richard couldn't see was that his tantrum had already cost him everything he'd worked for. His federal contracts were being reviewed. His company's stock was falling. His board of directors was convening an emergency meeting, and the woman sitting calmly in seat 2B had the power to ensure that his behavior had consequences far beyond social media embarrassment. But Richard Blackwood had no idea who he was really talking to. That education was about to begin. The moment Captain Rodriguez approached Vanessa's seat, the entire dynamic in the cabin shifted. Experienced passengers could sense when something significant was about to happen, and the conversations throughout first class dropped to whispers. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said, his voice carrying newfound respect. "I feel like I should know you. Have we worked together before?" Vanessa looked up from her folder, and for the first time since the confrontation began, she smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind of expression worn by someone who was about to educate a room full of people who thought they understood power. "Not directly, Captain Rodriguez. But I've reviewed your safety record, your emergency response protocols, and your crew leadership evaluations. They're all exemplary." Rodriguez felt a chill run down his spine. "Ma'am, that information isn't publicly available. Only FAA officials have access to." His voice trailed off as understanding dawned. Richard, still standing in the aisle like a man convinced of his own righteousness, laughed harshly. "Oh, this is rich. She's pretending to be some kind of government official now. What's next? Are you going to claim you're the president?" Vanessa reached into her briefcase with deliberate slowness. Every eye in the cabin followed her movement as she withdrew a black leather credential case. The gold seal of the United States government caught the cabin lights as she opened it. "I'm Dr. Vanessa Clarke," she said, her voice carrying the full weight of federal authority. Chairwoman of the Federal Aviation Administration. The silence that followed was so complete that the only sound was the gentle hum of the aircraft's ventilation system. 47 passengers held their breath as the implications of that statement sank in. Maria's live stream exploded. Comments flooded in so fast they became unreadable. Holy shit, did she just say FAA chairwoman? This man just discriminated against the head of the FAA. He's so screwed. Someone screenshot this moment. Captain Rodriguez felt his knees go weak. Ma'am, Chairwoman Clarke, I had no idea you were on board. That was intentional, Captain. I'm conducting an undercover civil rights investigation into discrimination complaints on this route. Mr. Blackwood has just provided me with more evidence in 20 minutes than my investigators gathered in 3 months. Richard's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and then stark terror as the reality of his situation became clear. You're lying, he whispered. You can't be... You don't look like what Mr. Blackwood? Like someone who runs the largest aviation safety organization in the world? Like someone who oversees 44,000 employees and an $18.6 billion budget? Like someone who has the authority to ground every aircraft in American airspace with a single phone call? The color drained from Richard's face entirely. His legs seemed to give way and he grabbed the back of Maria's seat for support. This can't be happening, he muttered. This can't be real. David Thompson, who had been recording everything on his phone, slowly lowered the device. He was watching the most spectacular professional suicide in corporate history, and he finally understood the true cost of Richard's worldview. Elena Vasquez, monitoring from the boarding door, received a text from airline headquarters. Chairwoman Vanessa Clarke is on flight 447. Repeat the FA. Chairwoman is on your aircraft. All department heads notified. CEO Martinez requests immediate report. Elena's hands shook as she typed back. Chairwoman was subjected to racial discrimination by passenger Richard Blackwood. Incident recorded by multiple passengers. International social media coverage ongoing. The response came back in seconds. Jesus Christ. Martinez en route to airport. Full executive team mobilizing. Sarah Mitchell understood that she had just witnessed something that would be studied in customer service training for decades. A passenger had just discriminated against the most powerful person in American aviation, and she had initially tried to accommodate the discriminatory request. Chairwoman Clarke Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. Apologize for not intervening more forcefully. I should have. You did your job under difficult circumstances, Ms. Mitchell. My report will note that you attempted to de-escalate while maintaining policy. The failure here isn't yours. Vanessa's tone was professional, but not unkind. She understood that frontline employees often found themselves caught between corporate pressure and moral obligations. But Richard Blackwood was beyond redemption. Wait, he said, desperation creeping into his voice. I can explain. This was just a misunderstanding. I wasn't trying to discriminate. I just wanted a quiet environment for my federal meeting. Your federal meeting. Vanessa's eyebrow arched slightly. The Department of Energy contract you mentioned, the $2.3 billion renewable energy infrastructure deal. Richard nodded frantically, seeing a potential lifeline. Yes. Exactly. You understand how important this is? I was just trying to... Mr. Blackwood, that contract was terminated approximately 8 minutes ago. The words hit Richard like a physical blow. What? That's impossible. How could you know? Because I sit on the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission Oversight Board. Because I reviewed your company's bid as part of my transportation infrastructure responsibilities. And because the moment your discriminatory statements went viral on social media, the Secretary of Energy received calls from 17 congressional offices demanding your disqualification. Vanessa reached for her phone and showed Richard the screen. Email notifications covered the display. Urgent, Blackwood Energy Contract Cancellation, Federal Contract Review, Discrimination Concerns, Congressional Inquiry, Blackwood Energy, Ethics, SEC, Investigation, Social Media Statements. Richard stared at the phone as if it contained his death warrant, which in many ways it did. "My company," he whispered, 30 years of building, is currently being reviewed by the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. Vanessa finished. Your statements today didn't just violate federal transportation law, Mr. Blackwood. They triggered investigations into whether your company has engaged in discriminatory practices in hiring, contracting, and business partnerships. Maria's live stream had reached 47,000 viewers, with major news outlets now monitoring the feed. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, and the BBC had all assigned reporters to the story. The hashtag Chairwoman Vanessa was trending worldwide. Captain Rodriguez, understanding that he was now dealing with a federal official who had been the victim of a civil rights violation, activated emergency protocols. Chairwoman Clarke, what are your instructions for handling this situation? Document everything, Captain. Ensure that all recording devices capture Mr. Blackwood's statements for the record. Notify ground control that we have a federal civil rights investigation in progress. And inform airport security that Mr. Blackwood will need to be met by federal marshals upon landing. Federal marshals. Richard's voice cracked. You can't be serious. This was just a disagreement about seating Mr. Blackwood. You demanded racial segregation on a commercial aircraft while being recorded by dozens of witnesses. You questioned my right to occupy a seat based on my race. You advocated for what you called a natural order that places white passengers above black passengers. Those aren't disagreements. They're federal crimes. The cabin remained silent except for the soft sound of Maria providing commentary to her live stream audience. Guys, I can't believe what I'm witnessing. This man just lost a multi-billion-dollar contract because he couldn't handle sitting next to a black woman, and that woman turned out to be the head of the FAA. This is the most incredible demonstration of karma I've ever seen. David Thompson, who had started the day hoping to network with Richard Blackwood, posted a final tweet. Watching a man destroy a $9 billion company in real time because he couldn't accept a black woman's right to exist in first class. Character is revealed in moments like these. Richard made one final desperate attempt to salvage his situation. Chairwoman Clarke, please. I made a mistake. I was stressed about my meeting. I spoke without thinking. Surely we can work this out between professionals. I contribute millions to civil rights organizations. I employ thousands of people. Vanessa looked at him with the calm expression of someone who had seen this exact performance many times before. Mr. Blackwood, an hour ago you believed you had the power to have me removed from this aircraft. You believed your money and status gave you the right to determine who belongs in first class and who doesn't. You were wrong about your power, and you were wrong about mine. She stood up, her slight frame somehow commanding the attention of every person in the cabin. But more importantly, you were wrong about the fundamental principle that governs American aviation. Everyone who purchases a ticket has the right to fly with dignity regardless of race, religion, gender, or economic status. My job is to ensure that right is protected. Your behavior today ensures that I will have all the documentation I need to strengthen those protections. Richard Blackwood sank into his seat, finally understanding that his world had ended. His company was under federal investigation. His contracts were terminated. His reputation was destroyed. His $47 billion in wealth was about to evaporate under the weight of legal challenges, regulatory penalties, and the complete collapse of investor confidence. And it had all happened because he couldn't tolerate sitting next to a black woman who had the audacity to act like she belonged in first class. The most powerful lesson in civil rights law was about to be delivered at 35,000 feet, and Richard Blackwood was about to become a cautionary tale studied in business schools for generations. But the education was just beginning. The aircraft's communication system crackled to life as Captain Rodriguez received priority messages from air traffic control airline executives and federal authorities who had been monitoring the social media explosion. American 447, this is Dallas Approach Control. Be advised you have priority handling for immediate arrival at Reagan National. Federal marshals standing by for passenger transfer. Rodriguez acknowledged the transmission while watching Richard Blackwood slowly disintegrate in his first-class seat. The man who had boarded with supreme confidence now sat slumped forward staring at his phone as notification after notification documented the collapse of his empire. Vanessa had returned to her seat and resumed reading her reports as calm as if nothing had happened. But her phone buzzed constantly with messages from federal agencies, congressional offices, and aviation industry leaders who had seen the viral footage and understood its implications. Chairwoman, a text from the Transportation Secretary read, watching live coverage. Full federal support for your investigation. This changes everything. From Maria's seat, her live stream continued providing real-time coverage to over 60,000 viewers worldwide. Major news networks had picked up her feed, broadcasting the aftermath of Richard's meltdown to millions of people. This is absolutely surreal, she narrated quietly to her phone. We're watching history happen in real time. This man's entire world just collapsed because he couldn't handle sitting next to a successful black woman. And that woman turned out to be the most powerful person in American aviation. The comment section had evolved from shock and outrage to detailed legal analysis as attorneys, civil rights advocates, and federal employees joined the conversation. Civil rights law. This is Textbook 42, U, SC 1981. Violation: racial discrimination in commercial contracting. Federal employee Chairwoman Clarke is legit. She's revolutionizing aviation safety and civil rights. Business Prof Blackwood Energy stock down 23% in after-hours trading. This is corporate suicide. Legal Federal Marshals, SEC investigation, DOJ. Civil rights probe. This man is finished. David Thompson, who had documented the entire incident on Twitter, received a message from his firm's senior partners. Saw your thread. Emergency meeting tomorrow on discrimination policies and investment decisions. You did the right thing. His response to Richard's behavior had transformed him from a morally ambiguous venture capitalist into an advocate for ethical business practices. Sometimes, character is revealed in how we respond to witnessing injustice. Sarah Mitchell received word through her crew communication system that American Airlines' entire executive team was mobilizing. CEO Richard Martinez had chartered a private jet from Miami to Washington to handle the crisis personally. All crew members on Flight 447 are to provide full statements to federal investigators upon landing, her supervisor's message read. This is now a federal civil rights case. Full cooperation expected. Elena Vasquez, monitoring from the gate, watched as her supervisor's phone rang constantly. American Airlines' stock price was in free fall. The company's legal department had activated emergency protocols. Public relations teams were drafting statements that would never adequately address the magnitude of the crisis. But the most devastating consequences were unfolding in the digital realm, where Richard's entire professional network was abandoning him in real time. His board of directors convened an emergency video call while the plane was still airborne. Internal emails leaked within hours showed board members distancing themselves from Richard's leadership. Effective immediately, Richard Blackwood is suspended as CEO pending investigation. All federal contracts under review for compliance violations. Emergency succession planning initiated. Stock trading halted, pending regulatory review. Blackwood Energy's partners began terminating relationships. Environmental groups he'd testified against published statements calling for criminal prosecution. Energy sector competitors quietly celebrated the elimination of their most aggressive rival. But the personal toll was equally devastating. Richard's wife, Charlotte Blackwood, watched the viral footage from their mansion in Houston. Her social circle, country club members, charity board colleagues, society wives had all seen the videos by the time the plane landed. Her phone buzzed with messages that ranged from horrified disbelief to cold social exile. The country club where Richard served on the board called an emergency meeting. His membership was terminated by unanimous vote. The children's school where the Blackwoods were major donors requested that Charlotte remove her name from the scholarship fund. Richard's adult children released a joint statement through their attorney. "We are horrified by our father's behavior and categorically reject his views. We do not condone discrimination in any form and are pursuing legal action to distance ourselves from his business empire." Even his personal staff began abandoning him. Timothy, his longtime assistant, submitted his resignation via email while the plane was still in the air. "I cannot in good conscience continue working for someone whose values are fundamentally opposed to human dignity." Meanwhile, Vanessa continued working on her aviation safety reports, as if she hadn't just triggered the most spectacular corporate collapse in recent history. Her calm professionalism in the face of discrimination had become a masterclass in dignity under pressure. A message from President Biden appeared on her secure phone. Saw the coverage. "Proud of your composure and professionalism. When you're ready, let's discuss how this changes our transportation civil rights agenda." Congressional leaders from both parties issued statements supporting Vanessa and condemning discrimination in transportation. House Speaker Johnson called for immediate hearings on aviation civil rights. Senate Majority Leader Schumer announced legislation to strengthen federal anti-discrimination enforcement. But perhaps the most powerful response came from ordinary people who saw themselves in Vanessa's experience. "I Am Vanessa Clarke" began trending as Black professionals shared their own stories of discrimination in business travel. Airlines, hotels, and corporate travel departments faced unprecedented scrutiny as travelers demanded accountability for bias in service delivery. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People announced a federal lawsuit against Blackwood Energy for discriminatory practices. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission opened an investigation into the company's hiring and promotion records. The Securities and Exchange Commission froze Blackwood Energy's assets pending a complete audit. As Flight 447 began its descent into Washington, Richard Blackwood sat in first class, surrounded by the wreckage of everything he had built. His phone showed a cascade of disasters: federal investigations terminated, contracts, regulatory sanctions, criminal referrals, civil lawsuits, and complete social ostracism. The man who had believed his money made him untouchable had learned that character matters more than cash. The executive who had thought his status gave him the right to discriminate against others had discovered that justice doesn't recognize net worth. But the most profound lesson was simpler dignity isn't negotiable, regardless of how much you pay for your ticket. Captain Rodriguez announced the final approach to Reagan National Airport, where federal marshals, FBI investigators, and the largest media gathering in aviation history waited on the tarmac. Richard Blackwood's flight was about to end, but his real journey through the federal justice system was just beginning. The woman he had tried to humiliate sat quietly in seat 2B. Having demonstrated that quiet strength combined with institutional authority could move mountains, or in this case, could ground a man who thought he could fly above the law. As Flight 447 touched down at Reagan National Airport, the aircraft rolled past a scene that looked more like a movie set than a typical arrival gate. Federal marshals stood in formation on the tarmac. News vans lined the perimeter road. Camera crews positioned themselves for optimal footage of what had become the most watched aircraft arrival in modern history. Inside the cabin, Richard Blackwood sat motionless, staring at his hands as if trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. The man who had boarded the flight as a billionaire energy executive would deplane as a federal civil rights defendant, whose name had become synonymous with corporate discrimination. Vanessa Clarke gathered her papers with the same calm efficiency she'd maintained throughout the confrontation. Her folder, the aviation safety reports that Richard had dismissed as irrelevant, contained documentation that would reshape civil rights enforcement in American transportation. Ladies and gentlemen, Captain Rodriguez announced, his voice carrying new weight after witnessing history unfold in his cabin. Please remain seated until federal officials have concluded their investigation. The marshals boarded first, followed by FBI agents from the Civil Rights Division and investigators from the Department of Transportation. Their demeanor was professional but unmistakably serious. This wasn't a routine passenger disturbance, but a federal case that would be studied for generations. Mr. Blackwood, the lead marshal, said quietly, "You're under federal investigation for civil rights violations under 42 U.S.C., Section 1981. You have the right to remain silent." As Richard was read his rights and escorted off the aircraft, the other passengers sat in stunned silence. Many had witnessed discrimination before, but few had seen such immediate, complete consequences for bigoted behavior. Maria ended her live stream with a message to her 75,000 viewers. Sometimes justice happens in real time. Sometimes the arc of the moral universe bends quickly when the right person is in the right place at the right moment. Today we watched dignity triumph over discrimination, and it was beautiful. Her final video would be viewed over 12 million times and become required viewing in civil rights law courses at universities across the country. David Thompson posted his concluding thoughts. "I came on this flight hoping to network with a powerful CEO. I learned instead that true power comes from character, not cash. Thank you, Chairwoman Clarke, for the lesson." His transformation from amoral venture capitalist to ethical business leader would inspire similar changes throughout the financial sector as investment firms began incorporating civil rights compliance into their due diligence processes. 3 hours later, Vanessa Clarke stood in the Roosevelt Room of the White House, briefing President Biden on the incident and its implications for federal transportation policy. "Madam Chairwoman," the President said, "what you experienced today isn't just personal. It's emblematic of challenges facing millions of Americans who travel while black, brown, or different. How do we ensure this never happens again?" Vanessa's response was characteristically measured and profound. "Mr. President, we strengthen the systems that protect dignity. We make discrimination costly and compliance rewarding. And we ensure that every American understands that civil rights aren't suggestions, they're guarantees." Within 30 days, the Vanessa Clarke Aviation Civil Rights Act passed Congress with overwhelming bipartisan support. The legislation required real-time bias monitoring on commercial flights, mandatory civil rights training for all aviation employees, and severe penalties for discrimination in transportation services. The law's most innovative provision established the Clarke Standard, a requirement that airline executives personally certify their company's commitment to civil rights with criminal liability for knowingly false statements. Richard Blackwood's legal journey became a cautionary tale that resonated far beyond aviation. Federal prosecutors charged him with civil rights violations, securities fraud for misrepresenting his company's compliance with federal anti-discrimination laws, and conspiracy to violate constitutional rights. The trial broadcast live on Court TV featured testimony from dozens of Blackwood Energy employees who described a corporate culture built on exclusion and bias. The company's hiring records showed clear patterns of discrimination. Internal emails revealed executives joking about diversity theater and keeping the right kind of people in leadership. Richard's conviction on all counts resulted in an 8-year federal prison sentence and $47 million in fines and restitution. Blackwood Energy collapsed within 6 months, its assets distributed to employees who had been victimized by discriminatory practices. But the most powerful impact of Flight 447 wasn't legal or corporate, it was cultural. Videos of Vanessa's calm dignity under assault became viral symbols of grace under pressure. Her composed response to Richard's attacks inspired millions of people facing their own struggles with discrimination bias and inequality. Speaking at the National Civil Rights Museum 6 months after the incident, Vanessa reflected on the experience. That flight taught me something I hadn't fully understood before. Sometimes the most important battles aren't fought in courtrooms or congressional hearing rooms. Sometimes they're fought in airplane seats, hotel lobbies, and restaurant tables where ordinary people demand the respect that should be guaranteed to everyone. The speech delivered to a standing ovation concluded with words that would be carved into the museum's wall. Dignity isn't earned through wealth or status. It's not granted by others or taken away by bias. Dignity is inherent in every human being, and protecting that dignity is the highest calling of public service. For Richard Blackwood, the flight ended his career and freedom. For Vanessa Clarke, it became the defining moment of a legacy built on ensuring that no American would face discrimination while pursuing life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, whether in first class or economy. The lesson of Flight 447 resonated across American society. Character is revealed not by how we treat those we consider equals, but by how we treat those we think are beneath us. In this case, the person Richard thought was beneath him turned out to be flying the plane. And sometimes, just sometimes, justice happens at 35,000 feet. If you've ever felt like you didn't belong somewhere, this story is yours. Share your experience below. Every voice matters. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell because these stories need to be told, and your support helps us keep bringing you powerful content that makes a difference. Drop a like if this story moved you and share it with someone who needs to hear that dignity and justice can triumph over hatred and prejudice. Let's build a community where everyone's story matters and where standing up for what's right creates real change. Until next time, remember that quiet strength can change the world. Your voice matters. Your dignity matters. And sometimes the person you underestimate is exactly the one who can reshape everything. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.